Good evening. My name is Barbara Cheeves. I am the president of Convergent Associates Consulting and a member and past chair of the Palm Beach County Criminal Justice Commission. I welcome you this evening to our second Police and Community Forum, live from the Arts Garage in Delray Beach. Just a little bit about how we got here, and then we'll introduce everybody else in the room. Tonight we're talking about Delray Beach and Boynton Beach. And how we got here is that after the killings of George Floyd, our Black elected officials in Palm Beach County suggested that we host forums around Palm Beach County so that police chiefs and police officers in our communities could get to know our communities, and our communities could get to know our police officers. So we started this in July. We did a large forum at the convention center. We had about 5 police chiefs, the sheriff, about 6 elected officials, a few community members. And when it came time to take this on the road, which is what we're doing now, it was time to cut down the number of professionals, if you will, and introduce more community members. So we're planning to do this around the county. We're kicking it off this evening in Delray Beach. And we're gonna have our community members in Delray Beach really have an opportunity to get up close and personal, Delray Beach and Boynton Beach, to get up close and personal with their police chiefs. So I wanna take a minute and introduce a few people before I turn it over to my co-host this evening. I'd first like to announce we said we had some elected officials in the room, and we do. So I'd like to acknowledge our County Commissioner, Mac Bernard from District 7, and a member of the Black elected officials. The Vice Mayor of Palm Beach County, Robert Reinwarth, is here with us this evening. Representing the cities that we're highlighting this evening, the Mayor Shelley Petrola of Delray Beach, and Mayor Steve Grant of Boynton Beach. And I hope I haven't missed any elected officials. If I do, please have somebody slip me a piece of paper and tell me you're here. I also want to acknowledge the woman who runs this county, our county administrator, Virginia Baker, who's here with us this evening. So just a few housekeeping things. Unless you're eating or speaking, please acknowledge and be responsive to the COVID restrictions for the county. Please keep your mask on and keep your distancing unless you're eating or speaking. A couple of thank yous. We want to thank the Arts Garage. I'm excited to be here this evening. I just met their fairly new executive director. It's a place I haven't been in a while, but it's a great venue. So thank you, Arts Garage, for having us this evening. This venue is a wonderful venue in Palm Beach County for music, art, spoken word, and they have our support, and we're happy that they're supporting us this evening. We want to thank the people that helped to get the community in the room. Healthier Delray Beach and Healthier Boynton Beach. And I know that Kenya Madison from Delray Beach and Ricky Petty from Boynton Beach are here. I think we have them at work outside. And thank the Palm Health Foundation who funds those organizations. If you don't know anything about them, you should catch Ricky and Kenya tonight and have them tell you a little bit more about them. Thanks to the Palm Beach County Board of County Commissioners and everything that they do. Thanks to Channel 20, they're like a moving act. They just come in and they set up. They're amazing. They're a roving TV station. Thanks to them and the work that they do. And lastly, thank the CJC, the Criminal Justice Commission. The Criminal Justice Commission, as I said, I'm a proud member of for the last 12 years, and I'm a past chair of. We have a community engagement task force that I'm proud to host with one of our chiefs this evening, Chief Sims from Delray Beach. A couple of goals for this evening. And again, the goal tonight is to have the community give them an opportunity to ask questions of the police chiefs and the elected officials. Your voice is important. And as we get through the evening, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about some opportunity to have dialogues with the healthier Delray Beach communities. Restrooms are available here. They're in this corner and all the way down the hall that way. For those of you watching online, we are taking questions from the audience. If you have a question this evening from the audience, we have mics at either side of the stage. If you're sending your questions in virtually, we will try to answer as many of them as we can. If they don't get answered this evening, please know that we or one of these chiefs behind me will answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my handsome co-host, Ted White.
Barbara, thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm Ted White, Public Information Manager for the Delray Beach Police Department. Again, welcome. We are looking forward to a good night tonight, and hopefully you will take away a lot from these two police chiefs that you will soon be hearing from. They are looking forward to answering your questions here in person and online as you send your questions as well. So I also like to take a quick moment to also acknowledge another elected official who is here, Deputy Vice Mayor Shirley Johnson. Let's recognize her as well. Thank you, we appreciate it. Now, let's introduce the two police chiefs that we have been talking about. Delray Beach Police Chief Javaro Sims, as well as, yes? And the Boynton Beach Police Chief Michael Gregory. Okay, so Barbara and myself, we will also be asking questions, and of course we can take questions here inside here as well, and questions from the online community. So we look forward to that, and again, we will not be able to answer each and every question because of time restraints. So let's get right into it. Yep. Okay, so the first issue we want to talk about right now is use of force. If we can get a quick introduction from each of the police chiefs, and we'll talk about the use of force. How do you define use of force? Let's start with you, Chief Sims.
First of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for putting this event on. I think it's needed and necessary, not only in Delray, but throughout Palm Beach County. And moving forward, that is the goal, to move this program around Palm Beach County, to answer questions from the community. But to answer your question, force that's reasonably necessary to effect a lawful objective, for the most part. That's how I define use of force. Now, if you want me to go a little further, to effectively halt aggressive actions, to overcome specific resistance by a subject, to protect self and others.
And Chief Gregory, same question.
Well, first I'll start off by saying also good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. I greatly appreciate it, and I also am a big advocate and fan of participating in these types of events where we can have a community dialogue and discuss issues that are important to the neighborhoods and to the cities and to the residents. A lot of use of force policy is driven by case law. So you'll find from agency to agency, the policies are very similar or use similar language. So ours touches on the same that Javaro just mentioned in Delray Beach. We use some of that same language, but we also characterize it in a manner that says a use of force would be for an officer to have tactics and or techniques that they employ to defend themselves, to defend someone else, and or to accomplish a lawful objective when someone's resisting. So in short version, short order, that's how we contextualize the concept of this application of force.
But with understanding, another key component to this, to use of force, is the training piece. So we must continue to train our officers in the manner in which they should conduct and use of forces when they're faced with situations. So that's very important.
To go further into use of force, we also saw a terrible national incidence with the use of a chokehold. So could you tell us what's your policy on use of chokeholds?
Well, specifically in my policy, it states that an officer shall not use lateral vascular neck restraints or chokeholds, except in circumstances where lethal force is objectively reasonable and justified. In other words, if an officer is fighting for their survival, is there use whatever means necessary to do just that. But outside of that realm, we do not use chokeholds or vascular restraints.
In Boynton Beach, chokeholds and lateral vascular restraints are prohibited. They're prohibited unless it is a life and death situation. They're defending someone and or themselves. So it's, again, a very similar policy. And you'll start to see that more common now. I think there's been a campaign nationwide referred to as 8 Can't Wait. It's been very popular. It's gotten a lot of traction. The Florida Police Chiefs Association has come out in support of the 8 Can't Wait campaign, and we've actually put together a subcommittee to generate model policy that incorporates the best way to implement the 8 Can't Wait and use of force policy throughout the state. We finished that work product, and we've published those guidelines statewide for all police chiefs to take advantage of. So we're really, and that's one of the key elements under the 8 Can't Wait campaign, right, is the barring of chokeholds. But for everyone to be clear, that there is a distinction between the chokehold, which is the application of pressure against the throat where you can't breathe, versus a lateral vascular neck restraint where they're blocking the blood flow to the brain to force one to pass out. So we're looking at prohibiting both of those techniques.
But also with the understanding that here in Palm Beach County, the chiefs work very closely together, and the vast majority of the policies in Palm Beach County will mirror just what we are speaking of this evening.
And another issue, of course, we've been seeing nationally with different incidents is incidents in which body-worn cameras have come to play a part in America, for the most part, getting to see at least one perspective of different incidents happening. Let's have you each talk about your department, body-worn cameras. Does your department have those body-worn cameras, and some of the policies and procedures? Chief Sims?
Well, we implemented a body-worn camera program in 2014, and I was fortunate to be appointed to take lead in that process. And we did a phase-in process, 3 phases. Body-worn cameras are extremely expensive. If you do a poll of Palm Beach County, about 57% of departments in Palm Beach County actually have body-worn cameras. And it's mainly due to the expense. They're very expensive. The startup cost for Delray was just under $1 million. Now we're looking at approximately $500,000 a year for maintenance and mainly for storage. So it's very expensive. If you look around the country, approximately 80% of departments with 500 or more officers have body-worn cameras programs, but less than 50% of the smaller agencies have body-worn camera programs. And one of the questions that people ask, should the government mandate body-worn cameras? If in fact, if they decide to take that, that stance, they're gonna have to provide some level of funding to make that happen. So until then, it's going to be very difficult for some municipalities, especially some of the smaller municipalities, to bring on a body-worn camera program. They are extremely expensive, but it's a valuable tool, and it corrects not only the officers, but also the subject's behavior. So it's a valuable tool.
Chief Gregory?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think they are a major benefit to law enforcement right now, and it's a detriment for agencies who don't have the programs to not have that tool available to them. We do have it in Boynton Beach. The program was rolled out between 2015 and 2016. We've deployed them throughout our patrol division, so all of our patrol officers have them, as well as our number of our specialty units like K-9 and traffic enforcement. We're actually looking to further expand the program into some other areas of the department as well, including our SWAT team, and that'll be something we'll be focusing on in the next fiscal year. Just to touch on a couple of the same points, the value isn't just, there's intrinsic value in the fact that there'll be a recording, and that recording will be available to replay what happened during an incident that there may be a question about. But I believe, as Chief Sims was just touching on, there's also that benefit for the officer, because they can use that tool, if it's used properly, for training purposes, because not everything is some sort of a horrific incident or there's an improper use of force. There's little things that we do as far as driving habits, as far as how we are protecting ourselves when we're not involved in the call for service and the like, that are training issues that we can absolutely, and it's been proven to show that those cameras really help with addressing training issues as well as complaint issues And then there's that behavioral modification issue where you're out with a subject who may be a little belligerent or uncooperative, but it seems kind of amazing that once you remind them that everything that they say and do is being recorded, their conduct seems to change a little bit in most cases. So there's multiple benefits to the program, not just the complaint management, but of course that's what gets the headlines.
Yeah, it definitely strengthens police accountability and prevent confrontations. That's a proven fact. And one of the big concerns prior to implementing the body-worn camera program, quite naturally, the officers was reluctant when that came about because they're looking at this big brother concept that's permeating through law enforcement from time to time when you put accountability measures in place. But I can guarantee you the body-worn camera has vindicated officers more so than convicted officers. So it's a valuable tool.
And there's quite a bit of misconceptions out there amongst the masses. Some people believe that these body cameras are rolling, recording all of the time. Let's talk a little bit about when, during an encounter, these body cameras come on and a little bit about that.
Certainly. That's a agency by agency decision. So the chief and that organization will determine by policy when the officer should turn their camera on. In some agencies, depending on how they procured it, it becomes a financial question, because if it's rolling from the point that you roll out of briefing and get in your car, go on the road, to the point that you come in at night and you're done for the day, at the end of your shift, that is a lot of continuous video recording. And all those videos have to be stored someplace for each and every one of those officers. It's terabytes of storage that you end up with. So for some agencies, that's a financial decision as to when to turn it on and turn it off. Most agencies realize that there's a sweet spot, you might say, for when is the officer in contact with the public? When are they taking official action? If they're not taking official action, if they're not involved with the public, then that footage really isn't of high value. So that's more in line with the policy in Boynton Beach. Our officers need to turn, when they get a call for service and they're taking police action, they need to turn their cameras on. If they're not on a call for service and someone approaches them with a complaint, they need to turn that camera on. So when they're involved in contact with the public that is for police services, that should be captured in camera, because you never know what's going to happen after that fact.
To eliminate any doubt or confusion, we're just a little bit more specific in our policy. You ought to turn your camera on prior to arriving on a scene. We find that to work best for us, that eliminate any inkling or whether I should turn it on when I make contact with a person. I mean, it eliminates all the confusion. So prior to arriving on the scene, you are expected to turn your body-worn camera on.
In fact, some of the police departments have a system in place where it is continually rolling, and then when they actually hit the body camera to actually record what they are perceiving to be the beginning of it, sometimes in most cases it is backtracking 15 seconds to 30 seconds. Absolutely. Before that person
Yes.
Engages the body-worn camera.
That's kind of in line with what we have currently. The cameras are on, you will see a red light, but they're not recording. Prior to the officers making contact, prior to arriving on the scene, they are to mash that button and the light will turn green. That means it's recording. So.
Yeah, they're referred to as their pre-record feature on the cameras. It is an option, and that's a policy decision as well that the chief makes as to whether they should use pre-recordings or not use pre-recordings, and or whether or not to use a post-recording. So that means the camera would continue to roll for a period of time, 10, 15, 30 seconds, after the officer turns the camera off. Those are both configurable options within the technology, which come down, again, policy decisions as to how you want to roll it out.
But that's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to body-worn cameras. You also got to have accountability measures in place to ensure that they're being used effectively in the manner in which they should be used. So we do periodic checks, random checks on our officers to check and see what's taking place, whether they're using the camera properly. And sometimes we may discover information on those videos that might be allow us to put a training in place to correct behaviors. But if we see something that's probably out of order or any violations, we'll address those as well. So it's a valuable tool.
Okay, and we also want to remind people that here in the audience here, if you have any questions, we have 2 mics at the end of the stage on the left and the right-hand side.
Or you can write your question down on a piece of paper and lift it up, and a staff member will bring it up to us. One more question on the cameras. You talked about having access to the footage. How soon can the public have access to that footage? And how does that work?
In Boynton Beach, the public can have access as soon as it was available, unless there's some sort of an open investigation that resulted from that footage. So it's public record under Florida state statute. Anyone can get access to it if they are a party to the actual incident. So a lot of thought had to go into this. There was a lot of conversations with the Police Chiefs Association as well as the politicians when they drafted the laws regarding body-worn camera, because while we are looking and having this conversation about the benefits of the program from a complaint response perspective, to that discussion earlier about should they just be turned on all the time when the officer comes to work to the time they go home. Well, it's going to capture a lot of things that may be unintended. It may capture conversations and or video footage in places that people have an expectation of privacy. And that's a problem as well, to record all of these things. So the statute allows for the officers not to have recordings in medical facilities when you're getting counseled by your physician or you're in a condition that it doesn't have anything to do with the criminal investigation. You're getting medically treated. That shouldn't be recorded as it made a public record that your neighbor can now come and see what happened to you at the hospital because they didn't see you come home. Or they saw the police at your house yesterday and they want to know what's going on, so make a public records request to see, the body camera footage that the police went into your house and say, oh, look, they got new furniture. We didn't know about that.
Yes.
There's concerns for privacy because as a public official, what we do at work is public. So there are constraints to that. So again, we do limit what they record, and we do have to involve a lot of time with the training of the officers to know what they should be recording, what they shouldn't be recorded, what is protected conversations, what is protected areas that people might have an expectation of privacy that's not a part of an actual active criminal investigation.
Yes, and part of those protections, we have to protect the victims as well. So we want to make sure we're not exposing victims to the body-worn cameras. But also, body-worn cameras is subject to public records request, just like any other document that we have in our agency. But they're readily available because what happens is when our police officers pull in our station, they automatically upload to the cloud. So they're readily available, but under the same circumstances, if there's an investigation that's taking place, quite naturally, you will not be able to receive that video until the investigation is concluded. But we pretty much operate in the same manner which Boynton does.
And I'll just add one more caveat for the audience's benefit, and that is typically to get a copy of that video, there will be a cost associated with it. So we just can't give them out because we don't know necessarily what's on them until we review it to see if there's something that should be protected or excluded because of an exemption to public records, and something that needs to be redacted. And if you have an officer's 8-hour day of footage, well, that's 8 hours of watching it to see what's on it before you can release it to the public. And then there's the editing, if need be, of taking out the section that has the person in the hospital being treated by the doctor, or redacting out the portion that shows someone's social security number on a document that the officer was, or their driver, or home address on the driver's license they were looking at, or anything else that might be considered an exemption to public records. That takes time to redact off the video, and however long the video is the first wave of time it takes to do it, and then there's another wave of time associated with the redaction. So there's often a cost. They aren't free, and there will be a delay while that processing, redaction, reviewing takes place. So they're typically readily available to us for taking through the process, and there may be a few days or a week before they're actually able to be released.
But the time has to be reasonable. But just like any other document that's created, it's subject to public record. But there also is a cost even if you want a paper document, because the research and redactions has to take place regardless of what type of document you're requesting. So there will be a cost.
Thank you. Don't be shy, audience. There's mics up here for you. You came out tonight for a reason. Don't make Ted and I do all the work.
And a quick reminder, the most important reminder for some of you out there, there's a cash bar out in the lobby.
Oh, is there?
Yes,
Nobody
there
told me
is.
that part.
They told me to remind them, so there you go. One more question about the body-worn cameras. What has been your perspective, real quick, and then we'll get to the question from this gentleman over here. What has been your perspective about the body-worn cameras in these cameras giving a different perspective that you may not have seen when an incident happened? Sometimes that can help or hurt the agency when you review that footage.
Well, the body-worn camera is not a magic wand, so we must understand that first. And a lot of times when you see incidents on television, they only show you a small portion of what took place. You don't know what happened prior to. And that's usually the part that we're missing when we see videos. Until public records are requested, then you actually get a chance to see the entire video. But it's a great tool. It's a reliable tool for the most part, but it's not a magic wand, because sometimes, depending on the circumstances, it can show an illusion of something that's not really taking place. And we kind of go through that phase, that process and that training, during our training as well. And also, we put on a citizens training day, and we showed an example of how that can take place. We had 2 people on a rooftop and engaging in dancing, actually. But the piece that saw, it seemed as though they were actually in a fisticuff, fighting. But once you showed the beginning in the entire video, they're doing a dance routine. So depending on how you edit and present it, it can make a big difference on what is being shown and how it is perceived from the public. And that's some of the things I've seen over the years since the body-worn camera been in existence. They only show the piece that they want you to see. Let's see the entire video so we can truly get a true depiction of what took place on a particular situation.
Chief Gregory?
I agree, and I just can't help but think I haven't heard that word fisticuffing quite a while.
Throwback.
Wow. But fisticuff. Yeah, completely. It does actually take some training to actually learn to watch and interpret what's on the videos. They can be deceptive if you only see a portion, and depending on the quality of the camera that recorded the images, you can miss something very easily that doesn't get recorded. So you may see some footage that was taken with someone's cell phone, and it doesn't show the same thing that a body-worn camera might show, because there are different types of cameras with different types of resolutions, and they can actually record differently. So you really have to be, as we can't rely, as Chief Sim just said, on one tool. It's not a magic wand. You have to look at, when you receive these complaints, all the evidence and take it into the totality of circumstances and everything into context to make a render opinion about something was appropriate, inappropriate, or if the officers are responding appropriately to whatever the resistance they encountered.
Okay, so we have a question from a gentleman here in the audience, sir.
All righty. Good afternoon.
How you doing?
My name is Andre Thaddeus from Connect to Greatness. Like some of us in these communities, we work with young youth, especially in particular young black males. Chief Gregory, Chief Sims. I was born and raised in Delray. I work in Boynton, so I'm familiar with both communities. How can we explain in more simple terms for our youth regarding some of the police brutality, violence that they've seen in the past, especially last 3-4 months, but over the years, where it's not from a politician and or the media? So what are, if any, plans that you guys have to do workshops like this with our young youth so they can really hear it from you guys and understand it in their terms?
I think one thing we do when situations and incidents occur, we disengage. And in my opinion, I think that's when we should be engaging more to educate not only just the youth, but also the entire communities on what's taking place. We have to be willing to have the difficult conversations. That's the only way we're going to be able to move forward and answer the questions that the community have in mind. So my suggestion would be, and it takes two, not just the police, it also take the community to be receptive to the police engaging as well. But I think we should engage more under those types of situations, to have these discussions with the youth, let alone the community as a whole.
Thanks for the question. Good to see you again.
All right.
Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night at the Boynton Beach PD.
Thank you, sir.
That's the perfect question, because right now, so much of the frustration that we are seeing play out on television and on our social media is with our young people who are frustrated, upset, they've had enough. They don't want to hear the stories anymore, they don't want to see the footage, and they're very quick to jump to conclusions. They don't need to wait 6 months for an investigation to be completed. They want that answer right now. And I think part of the answer, like what the Chief Sims touched on, is actually having that dialogue and asking them, how can we better communicate with you? That's part of the conversation I'm going to be having with Connect to Greatness tomorrow night at the Boynton Beach Police Department with our youth group, is to explore ways that we can continuously increase our dialogue. They have the opportunity to ask the questions that are important to them, not just what I want to say, not my talking points, but what do they want to understand? How can I relate better to them? We've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram. We're constantly pushing out on these platforms all the things that we're doing, as well as our criminal activity with press releases and who we're looking for and who stole what. We're putting out the messages of, hey, we're having a dialogue opportunity with coffee with a cop on this date, and we're having ice cream with a cop on that date, and we're pushing out the good stories of the officer who helped someone change a tire on the side of Congress. All of these, we're trying to balance that news cycle with everything that we're doing, not just one side of the equation, but when I have dialogues with young folks, they have no idea of any of this because they're not following us. They don't want to follow. It's not the end thing to follow the Boynton Beach Police Department, perhaps, if you're a teenager. That's not where they get their news from. So I'm looking forward to our conversation and more conversation with more groups on how can I best, as the chief, interact, communicate with your network, with your group, with the people that you're associating with, and getting these messages out in a format that is meaningful and understandable to them, because what we put out for some of our communities isn't easily picked up by other parts of our other sides of our community. As we all know, Palm Beach County is a very, very diverse community, financially diverse, ethnically diverse, language diversity is off the charts, and we have to work harder as law enforcement, as police departments, to be able to tackle each one of those different avenues of communication.
But another piece of this is also, and he touched on it as well, I was involved in a panel with Jack and Jill over the weekend, and one thing I pointed out to them, I don't want to be preaching and doing a presentation to you. What questions do you have of me? And I think it's very important that we ask our youth what questions do they have of us. We're so inclined to tell them what we want them to hear. We have to get out of that mode and start asking them, what questions do you have of me? But the other piece to this is also, and one thing I think we do very well here in the city of Delray Beach, we don't wait until something catastrophic takes place before we engage. We engage 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We're in the elementary schools, we're in the middle schools, we're in the high schools constantly. Not only we just reinstituted, I just had the pleasure of reinstituting our community policing team. They're in our communities. I mean, every section of our community engaging our community members. And one of the things, slogans I always use, we always have to invest in our communities. We have to make those deposits in our communities, because eventually one day we're going to have to make a withdrawal. And the community has to be trusting enough, confident enough that if something takes place, that we're going to do the right things to address them.
I have two questions from the online about the body-worn cameras. One asked, has there been any periodic checks where the officers did not use the camera? If yes, what was to happen? How would that officer be held accountable or reprimanded? And the second one that comes online is, it talks about funding being needed. Are we talking federal funding, and is federal funding available for that?
Okay. As far as the funding piece of that, there has been federal funding made available for body cameras. The number of agencies, they've done a good job of breaking it out in the past based on size of agency, so they can distribute those dollars appropriately for smaller agencies versus mid-sized agencies and larger agencies. But there's just never seems to be enough. I don't recall a time that all of the requests for funding were satisfied. So there's always those who don't make the funding list. And that's the challenge. Right now, it's all voluntary and offered that way, but as Chief Sims mentioned earlier, if it came to the point where it was mandated either by the state or the federal government, then I'm certain the departments would look to see that there was funding that was available from whoever mandated it to provide to the agencies. And the first part of that question was?
Periodic checks for officers not using their...
Be careful.
Periodic checks for officers not using their
Yes.
camera, and if so, what would happen, and how would he be held accountable or reprimanded?
Right. So these aren't our personal police departments. So we do work for the government, and as such, we have to follow labor rules and labor standards. And in the HR world that we live in, there's something referred to as progressive discipline. So if someone does something wrong, we can't just throw the book at them the first time they do something wrong, unless it's super egregious. They've really, they've done something really, really bad. Short of that, we have to go through a progressive discipline process. So the first thing you might start off with is, hey, you forgot to turn it on in this particular incident. You're given a verbal reminder and retraining to next time don't let this happen again. And then perhaps you get a second last chance. Then perhaps you'll get written up in documentation. Following that might be a suspension without pay. Suspension without pay. And then it'll just move up the chart based on how many times it happened and what those particular circumstances are. There could be a situation where the officer came into a confrontation and didn't have time to activate it. There could be a situation where I've seen on occasions where officers have gotten into a physical confrontation unexpectedly, went to hit the device, and it didn't activate because they didn't hit it in the perfectly correct spot. So there are all kinds of things that can happen. You have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and then follow the progressive discipline path to get retraining and the proper conduct that we want to see out of the officers.
All right. We do random checks on body-worn cameras, not targeted. We don't single out any officers. We do random checks. And what that does is allow us to view videos and the operations of the videos to see if an officer needs some remedial training, or if he's doing something that could be detrimental not only to him, to someone else. That's another opportunity to provide training, remedial training for that specific officer. But in fact, we pretty much follow the same guidelines as Boynton. We have progressive discipline. The first incident might be a verbal, then it'll be a written, it can be suspension. The chief has the ability to suspend up to 32 hours without grievance. Anything beyond that has to go to the city manager. But sometimes, depending on the circumstances, discipline can go all the way up to termination, depending on the circumstances in some cases. But it's done by case-by-case basis. Circumstances kind of dictate sometimes the discipline that a person may receive. It might be a malfunction, it might be a training issue. We have to take all those things under consideration when we live in different discipline against anyone.
We have another question from the audience, from the gentleman.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Christopher Redding, and I am the founder of an organization called Let's Talk Innovation. And I had two questions here today. So my first question is, what initiatives or strategies specifically surrounding mental health crisis are being implemented by the Delray Beach Police Department? And should I say my second question after that? Or?
Okay. Right now, matter of fact, we just met today with South County Mental Health. And the goal is to partner up with South County Mental Health to provide that mental health piece to our responses. Along with South County, we have a special population advocate, Ariana, who deals with the homeless and the addiction, and we have an officer partnered up with her. The goal is to have a mobile rapid response team when we get calls that's dealing with the mental health. And that's what we have in place now. That's what we're working on. Hopefully within the next week or so, we're going to have it in full-blown operation. And also the goal is to also house, during the busy time of the day, to house that mental health from South County at the police department. So they can also get an opportunity to review some of our bigger acts as well. So we're working with outside entities to help us to try to kind of address that mental health piece that's so readily taking place throughout our neighborhood and communities.
And my second question, I mentioned that I was the founder of Let's Talk Innovation, and what we do is we actually help startups, small business owners, and innovators in technology get funding for their business and also resources. And, you know, as we can see statistically, crime can be associated with a lack of resources or a lack of economic resources. And is the police department open to partnerships with organizations that promote business acceleration or small businesses?
Well,
That's an interesting one. I'd say yes, we're always open to partnerships and to community dialogue. I'm particularly interested, though, where we have synergy. So when there's outside 501c3s and or groups that have a alignment or a need similar to Connect to Greatness that was up just earlier, where they're mentoring youth and they're trying to encourage increase high school graduation rates, encourage further training, whether it be vocational and or college training. Those are things that obviously we're certainly interested in as well. Obviously, someone who had something that's totally out of our wheelhouse, that may not be the best partnership. But there's other entities within the city that maybe it is a good one, the Economic Development Department and the likes. We try to refer people to the right partner in that situation.
well, we have opportunities to engage partners in that manner as well. We have our law enforcement trust fund, which is available under certain circumstances to help fund certain situations under certain circumstances as well. But also, those funding has to be lived here in the city of Delray Beach only. But we always open to partner for organizations that's trying to do something positive to uplift the community, especially the youth in our community. So if you have something in mind, I'm more than willing to sit down and have that conversation with you, and I can see where and how we can be of any assistance to you. But what the thought is, it has to be here in the city of Delray Beach. And it will help if you have a 501c3 as well.
Chief Gregory, we want to start with this question with you. Let's talk about sworn officers. What are the requirements for someone to become a sworn officer? And I'll have Chief Sims weigh in on that as well. So the requirements for sworn officers, level of education, and diversity within each of your departments.
Okay, so there's actually two standards for that for most agencies in Florida. The Department of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement sets a minimum standard that every applicant has to meet to be eligible to become a law enforcement officer in the state of Florida. And that's typically a high school GED and 19 years of age, no felonies, and no past behavior that questions your moral that goes into moral character, and that you couldn't have committed any offenses of moral turpitude. So generally speaking, those are the minimum standards set by the FDLE. We can't go below that. You can certainly go higher than that, and that's where the chief and agency decision-making comes in. So in Boynton Beach, we do require our applicants to be 21 years of age, and we do require them to have at least 60 college credits to join the department. In addition to all the ones I just mentioned from the FDLE are required as well. They do have to go through a battery of tests and exercises. There's a written test. There's oral interviews that they go through. For Boynton Beach, they get ranked based on those tests and those interviews. And then the higher you rank, the further you're allowed to proceed in the process. There's a thorough, extremely thorough, painfully invasive thorough background investigation that occurs. If anyone's been through that, if they look at every single thing that you would never imagine anyone would ask you about, you get to be refocused on that in your life. So it's a very invasive process. And there's also a psychological examination that they're required to pass as well.
And diversity within your department.
Right now, we have approximately 14% African American, about 25% female officers. Nowhere near where we need. All the best practices, all the goal-setting standards and benchmarking tell us that we want to try to mirror our communities, and I agree with that. We should have race and sexual statistics that mirror as much as possible the communities that we serve, and we're out of whack with that in Boynton Beach. That's one of our goals, to try to increase that hiring of females, increase the hiring of minorities, to get back to a more comparable level. And it's not just the hiring that's important, because once they get hired, we need to see that matriculation through the command structure. I need more women sitting around the command table when I have my command staff meetings. I need more African Americans, more Haitian males, more Haitian females sitting around the table when we have supervisors deciding what the outcome of employee misconduct is. I need people in all of my specialty units that help reflect the community. So it starts with the hiring, but it's incredibly important that it proceed through the promotional process and to the assignments of specialty units.
Same question, Chief Sims?
That's very difficult to hire special African American males. That's a task within itself, and for various reasons. And one of the things that I found, a lot of the African American males that go to college and get college degrees, they don't want to be police officers. Also, the disconnect between law enforcement and the African American community has been an issue for many, many years. And the social unrest that's taken place around our country currently doesn't help the situation. But during my stint here as police chief, my minority hiring has been at 87%. 87%, because we make it a conscious effort to make that happen for the most part. To be more specific, I've hired 7 black males since I've been chief, which is astonishing within itself, because it's been very difficult and it hasn't been easy, and 2 black females. And we've hired 2 Hispanics males, 3 Hispanic females, 3 Hispanic, 3 white females, and 5 white males since I've been chief here. So we make it a conscious effort, an asserted effort to try to recruit from a diversity standpoint, but we have 166 officers. They all tasked with finding potential applicants for the Delray Beach Police Department. So, and that has worked, but we also have a recruitment team of 22 people that I established when I was an assistant chief. We go out to the universities, we go to the colleges, but we also start in the middle schools, we start in the high schools. We have a program out to Atlantic High School. We have a criminal justice program out to Atlantic High School that's been in existence for over 20 years. The vast majority of those kids in that program are minority kids. And currently we have about 15 kids from that program working at the Delray Beach Police Department. When they leave that program with 9 college credits and certified CSOs. And how we use those kids, because we also have the 60 college credit minimum as well. We hire them as CSOs, and by the time they get 2-3 years as CSOs, guess what? Now they meet the requirements, because they're also going to college as well to get the necessary credits. Just recently, I just transferred a CSO from CSO to police officer. And that's what the program is designed to do, to kind of groom your own. And most of those kids that's working at the police department are all here from the city of Delray Beach. So that program, it has been a huge feeder program and very successful for us over the years.
And CSOs, for those who don't know, is community service officers. They are the people that you see out there. They often write tickets, they are at crash scenes, and they do a lot of things. It's a sometimes perceived as a thankless job, but they have a lot to do with and very helpful with the police department.
Well, the only difference between a CSO and an officer, they don't carry a gun, they don't respond to calls for service, but outside of that, as far as the computer and the paperwork, it's all the same. So by the time they matriculate into become officers, guess what? They already got over half the battle already lit. Just a matter of working on the small things that would allow them to become the police officer.
I'm getting all the questions from the internet. So while we're on hiring, let's talk about training a little bit. I promise I didn't plant this one. What kind of implicit bias training do police officers receive? In Delray Beach, it says specifically, but we'll ask both. And in addition to that, second question, speaking of training, what are some of the additional trainings that are currently in place to allow officers to approach their work holistically and honor different cultures and mental health challenges?
Well, we have implicit bias training. We have, we have the human diversity training. Just recently, we implemented officer intervention training. And not only that, our training consists of scenario-based training. So we try to make training as practical as possible. So you basically acting out situations and scenes and responding. But a lot of our training also includes our community members as well. We'll have implicit bias training that involves some of our community members so we can gain the perspectives on both sides of the realm. And that's been very successful, and it opened up the eyes not only for the police officers but also for the community, because they have a better understanding on why we do certain things that we do. But we also have gain an understanding on why certain community members feel the way in the manner in which they do. So that's one of the most successful trainings that I've been a part of when it comes to implicit or intrinsic bias training. And I would recommend that. And my goal is next year to put on another training of that nature that would involve the community moving forward. Racial equity training. I plan on sponsoring a series of that, well, at least one at the beginning of next year. And part of that will be police officers and community members working together.
And just to dovetail, that is, as you kind of laughed a little bit, that's the hot topic right now. If you're not doing implicit bias training in your police department, then you're missing the boat. Everyone needs to be on board with that. It's been put out by the International Association of Chiefs, endorsed by the Florida Police Chiefs Association. It's hard to get away from some element. Now there's conversations about making requirements in police academies, and I support that. So in Boynton Beach, we do it as well. One of the hallmark programs for instructing in implicit bias is called fair and impartial policing. So the Boynton Beach Police Department took our department through that training series about 3 or 4 years ago. And I've been here now 2 years, and I'm looking to bring it back later this year as well to get our department back through that again. I don't think it's a number of these courses, they aren't just one and done. You just don't get exposed to it for 8 hours and now you're perfect or you know everything. You have to be refreshed. You have to be reminded from time to time of these things that we learned in these classes. And in my experience, the more you go through it, the more little nuggets of information you get out, the more lessons you will learn, the more you're exposed to it. So again, I'm big on it. I'm a big advocate and supporter of it. And we'll be bringing it back again through Boynton Beach. Same thing with procedural justice, another key program to help explain to officers the importance of how they interact with the community and what the expectations are of the community from their side and from the officer side, and how best to accomplish those things. Crisis intervention training, CIT it's referred to, is another majorly important training class that we try to put our officers through. the challenge right now is just trying to get some of these classes. We were trying to get procedural justice into our curriculum last year and couldn't get onto the schedule because the trainers just aren't available. They just can't book. There are some of these courses are booked a year out, and now with everything happening around the country, it's almost a shelter agencies want to run to and grab the base. Okay, I got some implicit bias training. Oh, I got some procedural justice training. I got to get that on my scorecard. You're trying to get these things checked off on your scorecard that everyone's trying to do right now. And it's a race to even get it. So part of it is when we find the opportunity to get onto a schedule to try to get where we can host it and bring in other agencies just to help spread the wealth because they're so difficult to get. But de-escalation, crisis intervention training, fair and partial policing training, they're all the hallmark and keystone of 21st century police training right now, and that's what we're committed to.
Do we have a question from the audience?
Yes. Anthony Hoskins from the Lord's Place. And I only have one question for both chiefs. Can we have more returning sentences being mentors with both departments?
I'm sorry.
Repeat that.
Can we have more returning citizens, guys and women that's coming out of incarceration, be more involved in the mentoring programs that you guys offer?
Make sure repeat that.
So someone who's been arrested, who's been released from jail, can they be more a part of the process of talking to the young people at large in your communities?
Oh, absolutely. We work with individuals who have spent time in jail or prison. Been doing that for quite some time. And not only we have used them in our communities, but we'll also use them to speak to kids at Atlantic High School and at the Village Academy. So those are things we've been doing for some time now. I think where we fail, we don't market what we do. So people really don't know what we're doing and how much we're doing, and that's our fault for doing that. But we do that now, and we will continue to do that, and we look for every opportunity to educate our kids because they need to hear from different perspectives. If you do this, this is a possibility. This could be the repercussions and consequences of your behavior and your actions. What better message, what better person can deliver that message than someone have gone through the process? That doesn't go over well coming from me because I haven't gone through the process. But if you put people before kids have gone through the process, have reaped great benefits in the past. And we have done it, we continue to do it, and we will continue to do it. And so that's something we do. And I'm sorry that we don't market it better, and so people can know more of what we're doing at the Delray Beach Police Department.
Same question.
Yeah, I don't have a major obstacle there. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. I don't want to repeat everything that Chief Sims just said, but yeah, I think there's intrinsic value in getting those messages from the source. It can't be delivered more passionately than from someone who's gone through it, but I also respect the parents' concerns about who we might expose children to as well. So obviously there's certain folks, there's a lot of bureaucracy we have to go through, but there'll be certain limitations on who could be before children or in the presence of children. But obviously once they complete the checks and check off all the boxes, having that conversation and be able to present that message, I think is valuable.
Thank you. Thank you.
Question from online. This says, a question from a youth. The youth wants to know, how could the warrant for Breonna Taylor's boyfriend have been executed differently? I feel it's important to answer a question from a youth.
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because we weren't there.
Yeah.
And the stories seem to change every other week of what actually took place. Was it a no-knock warrant? We don't know. So there's so many elements to that case that we completely just don't have the information about, so it wouldn't be fair. And I'm not avoiding the question,
No.
but not having all the proper information to answer that question in the manner it should be answered, it'd be very difficult. It's just my opinion.
And I don't disagree, but I'll say this.
Yes.
There is an expectation of how a best practice for executing a warrant. So without speaking to what happened in Breonna Taylor's case, I can certainly say that obviously one of the key factors in prior to executing a search warrant is having fresh and reliable information and intelligence to work off of. There's I don't know if it's actually a legal term, my mayor might be able to weigh in on that, but you don't want a stale warrant. And stale means it's too old. The information, when you execute a search warrant, that's an order from a judge directing the police department to go into someone's property and retrieve some item that's of evidentiary value for a criminal prosecution. It's an order to collect that evidence. So the relevant information that evidence is present is only good for a short period of time, because most things can be moved. If it's a firearm, if it's narcotics, it can be moved from place to place to place. So you have to have freshness of the information and reliableness of the information, that whoever you got the source, whether the source of this information, that those drugs, narcotics, the firearm, or whatever that evidence is you're collecting is there, needs to be a reliable source. And secondly, it needs to be fresh information that we can rely on the fact that it's there now. Otherwise,
Yes.
the judge isn't going to let us go into the property and take it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a best practice for executing search warrants, as well as whether there's a knock or no knocks. No knock warrants, which mean that the police don't have to announce their presence prior to entry into that property, should be a last resort. And the SWAT team in Boynton, that's our practice, is that we knock all the time unless
Yes.
there are circumstances that we encounter that preclude us from being able to knock, whether it's an unsafe situation for the officers or for the person inside, that we don't. But under normal general operating principles, operating standards, we try to knock at every single warrant and call the folks out to surrender and give them that opportunity. Understand that it's not illegal, it's not a bad thing. It is a legal standard to have a knock or a no knock warrant. You need to justify in your application for your warrant why you think this should be a no-knock warrant. And then the judge reviews that. And that's part of the conversation that I think gets missed sometimes when we're looking at some of these cases, that when there is a warrant, that's not the police department randomly deciding to go look in somebody's house. That's not the police department kicking down the door just to raid somebody's house. We don't kick down doors to raid houses. There's a legal standard we have to meet to go into someone's private property, and that legal standard means we need to get a search warrant 9 times out of 10. And a judge in some court of prudent jurisdiction has to authorize our application. We document what our evidence is, we document what our sources are, and a judge reviews that, and based on those things being valid, they issue, and only then will they issue a warrant that we have to execute to go and collect that property. So again, there's things that can be done as far as best practices. I'm not going to weigh into whether all that was done or not done in that particular case, but there are standards. Our SWAT teams are trained for that, and we don't take those types of warrant execution operations lightly. The plans are well documented. The folks that we're looking for is included in those operation plans. There's a briefing that takes place before it goes down. There's a lot of process to ensure that we get it right. There's checks that are done to make sure that the suspect and or subjects of our warrant are still there prior to the execution of that warrant, to try to avoid what would happen in the Breonna Taylor case.
But also with search warrants, those search warrants prior to being done need to be reviewed up the chain to make sure it has all the information needed and necessary before it's even presented to the judge. But once the judge signs off on a search warrant, you have 10 days to effect that search warrant. 10 days. Within that 10 days, it's your responsibility to at least conduct surveillance in the area that you're going to administer the search warrant, to ensure that what you have on that document, that those people are there, what you're looking for is potentially there. That's our responsibility to ensure that prior to going into a home or any other dwelling. It's our responsibility to ensure that. So, and if you're not doing that, I think we're doing not only ourselves a disservice, we're doing the community a disservice as well. So we have a responsibility in that as well, to ensure that we have the best information that we possibly can have. And that information, like you stated earlier, is fresh information. Because you have 10 days prior to getting signed, after getting signed, to effect the search warrant. If you don't, you have to get it refreshed. Therefore, you have to gather additional information to refresh the search warrant if you want to affect that search warrant at that particular location.
I believe we have another question. This gentleman here in the audience.
I'm Jeff Sherrills with the Florida Education Association, and I have a two-part question. Can you explain this whole notion that we hear a lot of community policing? And part two is, how do you partner with the communities with high criminal activity?
Well, community policing is a philosophy that's been around for quite some time, so it's nothing new. But the gist of it is to build and establish relationship with the communities in which we patrol or which we serve. And when I say that, get involved in the day-to-day rigors of the community, having those conversations, knocking on doors. My community policing ride around on their segways, they walk around in the communities, knocking on doors in every neighborhood, introducing themselves, asking people, do you have any issues and or concerns? But also a way to help people help themselves as well. Because sometimes you can determine or find out, do certain people need certain resources? And guess what? Sometimes we're able to provide contacts for them to receive those services if and when necessary. So it's a valuable tool, and no better way to establish and build and maintain relationships within our community. And I think we have done an amazing job here in the city of Delray Beach, as Boynton has done, because we kind of keep in touch with one another. I think we do that very well, and you can never do it enough. Now, what's the other side of that question?
How do you partner with communities with high criminal activity?
Well, community policing is one way of doing just that. And like I said earlier, we can't wait till something catastrophic takes place in our community before we start engaging our communities. That should be our day-to-day philosophy within our agencies. Our officers are expected to get out of their cars and talk to people. We have to continue to humanize law enforcement as much as we possibly can to break down those barriers as us against them. So, and it's a constant battle, but we have to continue to make a concerted effort to make that happen. So it's no one best answer. It's several things that needs to take place. But as we're engaging, the community has to be receptive to us to make it happen. And if the community is not receptive, it doesn't happen. We get engaged in the community, and not just when criminal activity is taking place. We get involved in the community playing basketball. We go into the schools. We go to the parks and recreation departments. Matter of fact, officers have taken money out of their own pockets and bought basketball goals and set them up in communities for kids who didn't have access to basketball goals. That's what community policing is. Community policing is doing those things that you don't expect for us to do, expect for our officers to do, that would have a positive impact on our communities and the members of our community.
Oh, he covered a lot. I'll try to touch on a couple of areas that weren't just there, but again, the question becomes, why is it being talked about so much, and why do police departments always want to talk about them being a community policing police department? And that's because there was a period of time that agencies got so driven by crime that all we were focused on was going to the call, meeting the person who had their house broken into, finding the person who had the car stolen. And we were just chasing calls, as we refer to it often in police circles. You're just chasing the dots on the map, or you're chasing the calls, and that's what we're focusing all of our energy on. And during that period of time of fighting crime and crime reduction, we lost touch. Agencies across the country were losing touch, losing contact, losing that identity with the police department, with the communities that they served. So this concept of community policing was developed. There's a lot of science behind it and philosophy. Generally speaking, there's 3 elements to community policing under the textbook version of it. And there's partnerships, which we've talked about a lot. Another part is problem solving in the community neighborhood. So instead of going to that mantra of chasing dots, chasing the criminals, chasing calls for service every day and jumping on this call and jumping on that call, why are we having all these calls here? This is the 10th time this week I've been to this address. This is the 10th complaint this month on this particular problem. So rather than just waiting for the call to come in and go again and write another report, the idea with community policing is let's get engaged a little bit, spend some time here, and find out what is the problem. Perhaps people are trespassing across someone's property or into some area they shouldn't belong because the property owner didn't put up a fence. And perhaps installing a fence, working with the property owner to install a fence might prevent people from cutting through their property or hanging out and having bonfires or whatever the case may be that is generating the problem. Perhaps if people are getting, there's a high propensity of car thefts or vehicles being broken into in a business parking lot, well, doing some site surveys and working with crime prevention and seeing, is there enough lighting? Is there cameras installed? Is the place too concealed? Maybe the hedges need to be trimmed down because you can't see it into the parking lot when you're driving by. And looking to solve the problem that's generating all of these calls for service at the same very address, sucking up resources, taking those officers away from other areas of the city that need protection as well. So all those come under elements of community policing. And the last part, there's 3 parts: partnership, problem solving, and then transformation. And transformation is huge for community policing internally because agencies and chiefs from time to time get kind of stoic. They aren't comfortable with change. There's a joke that's mentioned often that there's 2 things that police officers don't like, and that is the way that things are and change. They don't like either one of those things. So things often stay the way that they are. And sometimes to deal with a problem in 2020, you need a police department that's been reformed and reorganized in 2020 to deal with things. We're dealing with problems today that we didn't have 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, we were dealing with things that we didn't have as an issue 5 or 10 years before that. And if the department hasn't changed its structure, hasn't abolished some units and recreated new units to deal with these things, whether they're homelessness, folks and residents who are in mental crisis, and all the other dilemmas that we're encountering now, if we aren't remaking ourselves as an organization to stay current with the problems that are in our community, then we're left in the past, and we're not in contact and in connection with what the needs and the services of our communities are. So that's why community policing is so vital right now. That's why agencies are going back to it again and doubling down on it and doing these things with problem solving, partnerships with Connected Greatness and the other wonderful 501c3s that are out there, and then again reinventing themselves annually every 5 years or whatever to stay current with what the problems are we need to try to fix.
In fact, that's something that's great to see firsthand when these community policing units go door to door. And sometimes when they are knocking on the door, they answer it and they're surprised that the police officer is there. They're surprised, they're thinking that there's an incident, but they're in fact relieved that a lot of these officers are checking on them to see if everything is okay. Do you have any concerns?
Right. But what it does, it allows you to address the root causes of issues and problems within our community. But it also gives you an opportunity to listen to people, residents' concerns as well. Because I've gone to many community meetings over the years, and we go there with this game plan. We have all these statistics already developed and charted and getting ready to tell them this is your problem you have it in your community. And guess what? That's not their problem that they're having in their community. So it gives you opportunity to listen to their concerns as well and get an opportunity to compare notes so we can truly address the issues, concerns that residents have in their communities. We so readily, we so wanting to tell people what their problems are all the time. We have to be willing to listen, and community policing is a great avenue to listen to people's concerns.
All right, and we're seeing more and more people here in the audience showing up with questions. Let's take the question over here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rose Newbold. I'm the co-chair with Healthy Delray Beach, and also I'm the assessment manager with Primetime Palm Beach County. Now, I had 4 questions, but Mr. Gentleman over there took all of it, and you already answered 3 of them. So I'll end with my first one. Okay. How do you encourage your officers to report other officers when they're not doing the necessary things of what's right?
Well, I can tell you, just recently, we just completed officer intervention training for all officers. So the biggest obstacle is overcoming the culture in law enforcement, us against them mindset and mentality. But how we're presenting this new program is that, guess what, we're taking care of our own, because the program not only addresses issues within the police department, but also provides assistance outside of the police department. So it's a culture change that has to take place. But also, they have to see that buy-in is taking place from the top down. We have to get involved in the process. So we attend the trainings as well, and we dialogue with the officers and instill in them and how important this process is that we intervene. And during that training, we show a clip of what took place with the George Floyd situation. Now imagine if one of the officers would have been more assertive and intervened under those circumstances, a lot of the social unrest that we're experiencing currently wouldn't be in existence right now. Would be in existence right now. So we have to point out the value in intervening as part of the program, the value in intervening, and how it not only protects them, it protects their livelihood and it protects their family.
Same thing. Basically, I'm looking at it at a multi-level approach. I don't think there's one single thing that we can do to try to change that mindset. Some of it I think is culture, and then some of it I think is just human nature. It's like, how do you get one sibling to tell on what the other sibling did? It's a hard challenge. It's not something easily accomplished. One student telling another student, I mean, it's almost anti-human nature to a certain degree, especially when you're in an environment, a high-pressure environment like law enforcement and police work, where you're out with these people, and in Boynton Beach, we work 11 half-hour shift. So that day they spend with these other officers, going to calls, backing them up, looking over their shoulder, making sure that they're okay and that they're safe, and now you're saying, okay, if they step out of line, make sure you report this. It's almost anti-normal to think that that's something you're going to do, but it's important to do, and we have to do it. And that's, I think, through informal conversation. I've been to briefing and having these informal talks with our officers more since the George Floyd incident and probably the first half of the year. And I continue to go down there and just to pick their brains and to get their ideas and what their thoughts are, and they're all over the place. Formal training, as mentioned earlier, is important to show them how to do it and give them perspective and understanding of what they need to do and how to do it and what the policy is and how to apply it. And then in worst cases, discipline when they don't. If there's an investigation, there's a complaint, and we find out that someone didn't do what they're supposed to do, well, now it's part of our policy that they have a duty to intervene, which is another one of those the 8 Can't Wait campaign. They have a duty to intervene in policy. So I think I look at that from both perspectives. When we first rolled that out, a lot of officers were like, well, how are you going to make us do that? I'm like, well, how do you not? This gives everyone, you might say, cover. If for someone who wanted to speak up and felt like if I speak up, people are going to look at me funny, I'm going to be the snitch or the rat or whatever, they have that kind of mentality as well sometimes. Well, now you don't have to worry about what if, because it's required. This is our policy. You were expected to do it. Don't feel bad about it. Your answer as to why you did it is because I was ordered to. It's the policy of the organization to do this. And if I don't, then you're actually going to feel a consequence of not doing what you're expected to do by policy.
Chief Sims, I think the audience would like to know the name of this training and where some of its origins came from.
Well, the training originated out of, it's EPIC training. It originated out of New Orleans a few years ago. And we brought it here, but we kind of modified it to fit here in the city of Delray Beach. And it's been quite rewarding, because one of the biggest issues with intervening, a lot of times a junior officer may have to intervene with a senior officer, or an officer may have to intervene with a sergeant. So that can cause some difficulties, but we have to continue to express to them the value in intervening, because at the end of the day, Everybody wants to go home the same way they came to work. No one wants their job put in jeopardy because that person is not going to lose their job because you decided to go out there and do something you probably shouldn't have been doing. So if you could stop it before it happens, we don't have to worry about those things. So we stress it. It's in our policy as well. Fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, a lot of mandates that you put in place, you have to ensure that they're policy-driven. Everyone in my department is responsible for reviewing the policy because that's a sign-off on it electronically. Now, if it comes to you, you just delete it or you just check off that you read it and didn't read it, guess what? You're responsible for that policy, regardless. You're responsible. And another piece of that is holding people accountable. It's holding people accountable. You know, no one wants to discipline people unnecessarily. But unfortunately, sometimes that's what it takes. And hopefully you only have to do it once. Hopefully you're going to have to do it once.
Good evening. My name is Serena Spates. I am the Director of Marketing here at Arts Garage. And I want to thank you guys so much for coming here and speaking with us in the public. My father came out of retirement to work for the Boynton Beach Police Department. So,
Yes, he did.
Yeah, so.
Thanks for having us.
Excited and proud to have him do that. I wanted to ask you, so after the murder of George Floyd, obviously there was a lot of unrest about it, riots and protesting, and we've seen people calling for defunding the police. And I think what people really want is accountability and transparency. And so I was just wondering, what are some of the newer things that you guys are doing? I mean, I've seen it proposed that maybe having a database where we can see what kind of trainings officers are taking and if they've had disciplinary actions taken against them. Are you guys moving towards new things like that and implementing things where the public will feel that you guys are being more transparent?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I'm big on trying to advocate for transparency. I think that is something that can help us. One of the things that can help us build trust in our communities is agencies who are transparent in nature. And this question and conversations come up a number of times in different settings that I've spoken at. So I took that back and I spoke with our public information officer and our website folks, and what we've come out was a web page on our website called the Transparency page. I'm very excited about it. On that transparency page, the Boynton Beach Police Department website, bbpd.org, you can actually see a list of the relevant and pertinent training classes that we're putting our officers through right now. So I have them updating that regularly with the new types of classes the officers are going that talks about crisis intervention, fair and partial policing, procedural justice. We posted on that page a number of our high liability policies. So the community can see how we operate, what are our standards, do we abide by the 8 Can't Wait campaign, what are we doing? So there's about 4 or 5 of our department policies that are posted on our webpage right now that the public can go and look at, and we're looking at other ones to bring up and add to the page. We also talk about our community services that we provide. We do the, we're part of the Boy Scouts of America, or a partner, so we do an Explorer program. We have our Teen Summit that we used to have in the summer prior to COVID taking over and shutting everything down. We have our Explorers, our Teen Summit, and a host of other opportunities that we engage with the public, engage with our young people. We're putting all those on that web page as well, so that everyone, whenever, if you work days or nights, you don't have to worry about going to a meeting to go ask this question or come into one of these forums. You can see it and look at it and compare it to other organizations at any time on there. And we're, like I said, we're constantly updating the information and refreshing it that's on that page. The other things that we're doing is, again, the community policing piece falls right into that as well, because we can't stop looking for opportunities to partner, share, and be transparent with our neighbors, our community members, and I'm hoping, hopefully next year sometime we get out of this COVID situation and mandatory limits on capacity and limits on social distancing and the like, and we can start having more face-to-face interactions at our department We've got a new police department with a brand-new community meeting room that holds about 200 folks in there, and I'm excited to get them in there, but we can't under the circumstances. But one day, I'm looking to fill that room up and having regular conversations with our community about the things that are important to them and making our department reflect what's important to them and being transparent.
One thing we didn't do very well in years past is tell our stories. And I think we're doing a lot better job with the social media outlets. And we are currently working on ensuring that our special high liability policies will be available on our website as well. But also, prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of initiatives that we had actually completed. We had a lot of initiatives that we had in mind. One thing that we had done for the very first time, we actually had a youth academy. And we had about 25 kids in that academy, and it went really well. But we only have gotten a chance to do it once under the circumstances. Our Citizen Police Academy, our Haitian Police Academy, we put on our first community training day. Well, we had such a I guess, large sign up, we had to minimize it or reduce it to 50 people. And the goal was to do it at least twice a year. We had 50 people come in, and we trained them on maybe the four most controversial things that law enforcement deal with on a daily basis: the use of force, defensive tactics, vehicle stops, where we actually did mock vehicle stops. We actually put people in the cars, and we did vehicle stops, teach them how to keep their composure and how to act during traffic stops. You know, that's the scenario-based concept that we try to instill in our police departments, trying to make training as practical as possible. And that was a huge transparency piece when you bring in the residents to show them exactly, not just talk about it, but actually show them and get them to take part in what we're doing here at the Delray Beach Police Department. And so we're looking forward to continuing a lot of those initiatives once things get back to normal. And I think it's vital and it's important that we continue to make ourselves accessible to the community under not just that, but most circumstances.
Question from online. What are your officers' procedures for dealing with sexual or domestic violence cases? How do you think these procedures could be improved?
Well, every situation is different. If we get there, quite naturally, if we can determine who the aggressor is, we make an arrest. And not only that, we also, whoever the victim is, we try to provide services for those individuals as well. Because at the end of the day, no one wins under those circumstances, especially if you have kids involved. It's even more devastating to the family structure. So we try to handle them as delicate as we possibly can, but yet keeping in mind that we have a job and responsibility depending on the circumstances. So first thing we do, identify the aggressor once we get there, once we separate them and identify the aggressor. And once we're able to identify the aggressor, we have to make we make the arrest. And like I stated earlier, on the back end, we ensure that the victim is receiving the necessary services, not only for themselves, but also for the kids as well. And we provide a document for them to sign with resources that's readily available to them. And not only that, we have individuals that actually would call back and check on them and make sure they're okay as well. And that's why we miss our volunteer program. And because of the circumstances due to the pandemic, we're not allowing any of the senior volunteers in the building right now. And they worked as victim advocates, more or less, calling, inquiring, checking on, making sure they have everything needed and necessary for them to make them whole again.
It's not you're not going to find that a broad difference from agency to agency.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to domestic violence cases, a lot of that is regulated by state statute, and we have to follow those. If an aggressor is mentioned, if an aggressor is identified, then an arrest is made. But from the perspective of someone who's just on the scene, it's important to understand that what we're trying to, the number one thing when we get there is to de-escalate the problem. Obviously, we got called to a domestic violence call. We need to stop any violence from happening. And of course, these are highly volatile, and both parties are typically very excited and are animated. So a key training point for us is to separate the parties. Some folks don't understand that, but it's part of Domestic Violence Response 101 is when you get there, you explain why you're there, you start to de-escalate the situation and separate the parties and interview them obviously separate as well to get his side or her side or this person's side and that person's side of what took place. Look for evidence that violence had occurred. Is there broken furniture? Is there broken picture frames or vase or silverware or dinnerware? Things that indicate that there was a struggle, there was a violence that took place. We're documenting all of this, taking pictures of injuries, taking pictures of disorder in the home. There's literally an investigation that has to occur. Officers have to collect evidence at that scene and then use that to either determine whether there's sufficient probable cause to make an arrest or not. On the flip side, when it comes to that sexual assault case, obviously, again, we're there to protect and defend someone. If the assailant is still on scene, separate parties, gets both sides of the story. If probable cause is there and evidence to substantiate an assault that occurred, we make an arrest under those circumstances. But again, the officers are there to collect evidence. They need to talk to witnesses. They need to take everyone's statement, bring in our partners, particularly on the sexual assault side of the problem. We actually have partners that we work with that we bring in to provide those victim advocate services, to provide to collect treatment kits and the evidence that we need to take to court to prosecute someone for those type of crimes. So I think sometimes folks think we're going to get there and we're just going to calm everyone down and leave. That's like 1970s or 80s policing. Today, it is very methodical, it is very involved. The officers have to be well trained to communicate, to de-escalate, to collect evidence physically and or verbally, and to take those notes down. So it's quite a complex process, particularly on those.
But also, part of that evidence, we also take photos of the visible, anything that's visible, any visible bruising or any visible signs of physical occurrences as well. But also, we have a program in the city of, actually in Palm Beach County, SART. SART is a program whereas when under sexual assaults, we would take the victims to certain hospitals for testing and evident collection, which is huge and a benefit to the investigation moving forward as well. Just to add those two segments to what he said.
We have a few more questions in the audience. We'll get to you in just a moment here. I want to read one of these questions online. By now, most of us in this room, most of us who are viewing this right now have heard of the group called Black Lives Matter. This person wants to know what steps are being taken, if any, to address the concerns of Black Americans. We'll start with you, Chief Gregory.
The concerns that are being taken to address the steps that are being taken to address concerns of Black Americans?
Correct.
All the things that I just talked about earlier with transparency, all the things we talked about with community policing, they affect the Black community pointedly. If we don't know, if the officers aren't familiar with who lives in a neighborhood, if they don't know who belongs and doesn't belong, then they're working with an absence of information, and they may be taking tactics and or steps that are unnecessary. They may be stopping people that don't need to be stopped if they don't know who belongs and who doesn't belong. That's part of community policing that Chief Sims mentioned earlier, going door to door and meeting the business owners and the like. And another big part of addressing the concerns of particularly the group Black Lives Matter is that dialogue. I've actually prior to working in Boynton Beach, I worked at another police department in South Florida, and there was a very active Black Lives Matter group there, as well as the Dream Defenders, and obviously the NAACP, the traditional organizations. We went above and beyond to try to have conversations and discussions and implement policies that were appropriate before there was a critical incident that occurred. And we actually hosted a fair and impartial policing class and brought representatives from Black Lives Matter, representatives from the Dream Defenders into those trainings with our captains, our majors, our sergeants, to share ideas, to share the dialogue, to explain to them why it is that the officers take the tactics and steps that they do when they're on an encounter on the road. Because a lot of folks just don't understand that. They think, oh, they're just messing with me, or they're just harassing me. And the officers aren't getting paid to harass anybody, but they are getting paid to reduce crime and build relationships. But that's not always understood. And another key thing I think that's very important is that as human beings, we can be a little lazy with our thinking, and we think that every police department is the same. I've gotten asked so many questions about what we do in Boynton Beach because of what someone saw happen in Minneapolis, or what someone saw happen in Brunswick, Georgia, or what someone saw happen in Ferguson. There's over and I'm going to get it before you take it from me again. There's over 18,000 police departments in the United States of America. There's a running thing, but see, we can throw that out first.
Yeah.
There's over 18,000 police departments in the United States of America, and every single one of them has a different set of policies.
Chief
We do
Sims?
not operate the same way, and no matter where you go, you're going to encounter a department that does things differently for different reasons. And what is important, vitally important with every neighborhood, every community, is to find out what are the policies for your department. Because it doesn't matter what happens in Atlanta, it doesn't matter how they do it in LA, it doesn't matter how they do it in Ferguson. What matters is how they do it here in Delray and how we do it in Boynton Beach. And that's the conversation we need to be having with Black Lives Matter and anyone else.
Chief Sims, same question.
Not to be redundant, because a lot of the things you've already said, but we have to continue to meet people where they are, engage people in their environments, as a matter of speaking. But with that being said, also is educating the community on what we do here in our agencies, and being open-minded enough to accept criticism from our community, and with the understanding, guess what? We don't always get it right. We don't always get it right. We have to be big enough to accept that we don't always get it right. But sometimes we don't hear that because we're so reluctant to get engaged in the necessary conversations, or the difficult conversations. And one thing we do here, not just with the police department, we bring in our municipal government to get involved in a lot of the dialogues, because guess what? They are our policymakers within this city. I had the mayor sit in some committees with me as well, addressing these issues and our concerns. So they get an opportunity to understand it or dialogue from a policy perspective, not just from a law enforcement perspective. I think we owe our community to inform them and to educate them on everything that we're doing and all the measures that we're taking. But it goes back to what I said earlier. We got to listen to people. We got to listen to people. We have to listen to people's concerns. Quite naturally, there might be some things that we might not be able to accommodate, but guess what? We don't know until we listen. We got to stop disengaging under difficult times. We got to engage even more so when times get rough. Because when you retreat, you're going to lose the trust of your community because they feel as though you're hiding. There's no transparency because they don't see you. They don't hear from you. Whereas we should be engaging even more so under those times, under those difficult circumstances.
Another question from the audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello.
Chief Sims, Chief Gregory. With all the reforms that you've implemented, how are you going to measure whether or not they're working?
Very good question. Yeah. Very good question. Well, like I said, the proof is in the pudding to a certain degree on that one. Trying to find an old expression to go with your fisticuffs. We can throw a lot of tactics and strategies out there and see what sticks, but what we want to try to do is look at strategies that have an evidence-based foundation that have been proven to work in other places that address some of the problems that we're experiencing here. So we don't just randomly throw them out there. So we've looked at this A Can't Wait campaign. There's a great number of studies that have been done to substantiate each one of the recommendations in that document. So we're looking to move forward with those. As well as the training, implementing the fair and partial policing, the procedural justice. Those are taking longer because they're hard to get, but we'll get those rolled out there as well. And then what we want to see on the outside is, one, we see incidents of use of force go down, incident of officer injury and or subject injury go down. We want to see at the end of the day, we want to see crime go down, certainly. And what we really want to accomplish is trust increasing in our neighborhoods. And that comes back with feedback from our communities, that we're having this dialogue, we're having this conversation, we're doing surveys to measure the pulse of the community for those people who don't necessarily want to come into the station or they can't come into the department for one of these community sessions or attend one of these type of programs. We should be looking to get that input, that feedback from multiple perspectives so we can hit as many groups as we can. The folks that want to come to sessions like this, that want to come and participate in our in-house programs, that we can get feedback as to what they think, how good the job they think we're doing, as well as surveys that we can do via email to send out to folks and have them respond back, or via some sort of social media app, and measure that to tell us how things are going, if things are improving, if they're getting better. And if not, then we need to look at some other evidence-based strategies to bring forward to try to increase where we have the particular areas that we have deficiencies in. And again, part of the community-based policing process is that transformation. That's part of it. Is what we're doing working? And if what we're doing isn't working, then we need to stop it perhaps and fix it and then try again. We just can't sit back and cross our hands and say, okay, well, I give up. People's lives are at risk here, the communities as well as their officers. And folks, aside from the value of life and not being in danger of that, they want justice. They want justice. Fair, impartial policing and justice is what I hear an overwhelming theme from neighborhoods and communities is. And that's my job, to try to create an organization, curate an environment and culture in that department that perpetuates an atmosphere of justice for the community.
One thing we do at the police department, regardless of what type of policies you put in place, there's no way you can know they're actually following policy if you're not out there with them. So what we try to do, we try to involve as much as possible rank and file in some of the processes within our agency. We bring in officers, sergeants, lieutenants, and above to sit at a table. Even the union, some union members as well, to sit at that table and discuss issues and concerns and policies moving forward. And that has worked quite successfully for me since I've been chief here at the police department, because they have their hand in the process. They're more inclined to follow the process when they have involvement in the process. So that's been quite successful moving forward. But also, like you mentioned earlier, you got to look at the complaint process. What type of complaints are we receiving since we'll put certain trainings and certain measures in place? Are we receiving complaints from the same individuals? And also the surveys as well. We send out surveys. Sometimes it's very difficult to get them back. Sometimes it's too, we don't get enough back to really give a honest percentage of what's taking place, what the survey is trying to convey at times. And sometimes we do. So that's a huge, but also not only that, when we're out in the community, how are we perceived in the different neighborhoods and the communities? When we're out there, are people coming up to us, dialoguing with us, having just basic general conversations with us outside of just law enforcement matters? So we use those as some of our barometers to engage on how certain things are, how effective certain things are, policies are in our department. But it's very and extremely difficult at times. It's extremely difficult. But it's a battle that we continue to fight. It's a battle we will continue to fight.
All right, we want to take our last question from the audience, and we do want to give time for the elected officials to speak before we wrap this thing up. So last question from the audience.
Good evening. My name is Sham. I represent Freedom Fighters for Justice. My organization's biggest challenge right now is finding a way to gain more transparency from PBSO. Both of your departments seem very transparent. You've talked about transparency today. How is your relationship with PBSO, and how realistic is it for all departments in this county to work together to overcome racial tensions between law enforcement and the community?
Well, we have a very good relationship here in Delray with PBSO, and I think most agencies here in Palm Beach County have a good relationship with the Sheriff Department. And but like he stated earlier, the manner in which we do certain things may vary from department to department. Every community is different, so the expectations are different in each and every community. Believe it or not, got about 26 departments here in the county, including the sheriff. No one does anything the same way. There's no community the same. But we've used the Sheriff Department in many capacities that have been quite beneficial. But like I stated earlier, here in Palm Beach County, the Palm Beach County Chiefs Association, we work very closely together to strategize on how to move forward regarding certain circumstances. Just like, for instance, during the George Floyd situation, we came together. They put out a PSA regarding George Floyd situation, denouncing the George Floyd situation. So chiefs and departments across Palm Beach County, we work very closely together. We have very good relationships. We meet once a month. Even during these pandemic, we meet once a month, be it virtually or be it via phone. So we constantly feeding off one another, assisting one another, providing each other with information that would be beneficial moving forward. But you have to decipher through that information, is going to be beneficial for Delray Beach, or that's going to be beneficial for the city of Boynton. But it gives you options. It gives you options.
My response is very similar. Again, we have a very good working relationship with the Sheriff's Office. We don't have any concerns with that relationship. We work very closely together on long-term investigations as well as on typical, just an officer needs a backup on a traffic stop or something and the Sheriff's deputy happens to be in the area. We work very well. So I'm pleased with that relationship. And just to wrap up on that, the value can't be measured of the communication because we are talking. We are sharing our ideas. We're sharing our experiences. At the Police Chiefs Association meeting monthly, even when it's not a formal meeting, probably because of our proximity, I'm regularly talking to Javaro, to Adderley in West Palm Beach, to Osgood and Riviera Beach, to other chiefs in the area, Sean Brammer over at FAU. Have you experienced this? Have you encountered this? Do you guys have a policy on this? Did anybody ever do this before over there? What happened with that situation? And we're sharing ideas, we're sharing, and often Javral's invited me to be a part of community outreach activities here. When we have in Boynton, the same thing there. That goes so far as far as to help address community issues and sharing of ideas, because none of us are perfect and none of us are robots. We need to bounce ideas off each other. And we're fortunate right now to have a plethora of good solid chiefs in South County, in Palm Beach County, that are doing that right now.
Yeah. And one thing, we're not competitors here in Palm Beach County. We do everything we can to enhance one another by engaging in those dialogues. And like he stated earlier, if I have an issue and or concern that I haven't faced, guess what? I might call him, I might call another chief in Palm Beach County and run it by them and seek advice from other chiefs who have been chiefs longer than I have, who have possibly had experience whatever I'm asking about at that time. So we have done an amazing job, in my opinion, of uplifting one another here in Palm Beach County. All 26 departments. All 26 departments is involved in that dialogue. Everyone has the opportunity to provide input during these monthly discussions. And we all participate, even at the universities, FAU, Chief Brimmer. He's a part of this dialogue as well, because believe it or not, FAU is a small community within itself that has some of the same issues and or concerns as we have in our cities. So we complement one another quite well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we wind down the evening, I should have said earlier that Chief Bremer was not able to be with us this evening. He's not only the FAU police chief, but he also chairs our Law Enforcement Planning Council, which is one of those groups that they talked about that comes together monthly to work. And looking at our flyer for this evening, if we could have Mayor Shelley Petrolia, Mayor Stephen Grant, and Commissioner Mac Bernard come to the mics on the floor. We have 10 minutes left. I know elected officials. So that gives you about 2.5 minutes apiece for your parting words at each mic, if you would. Thank you.
So, I want to thank you again for coming here, Mayor Stephen B. Grant from the city of Boynton Beach. This is an aspect of information. That, one of the things that, I was glad to see how can a mayor help with these issues. For me, it's great to see Andre here from Connect to Greatness, and I remember when they first started off in the city of Boynton Beach, they came to me and saying, how can we help? And so getting them in touch with our Parks and Recs department, getting in touch with the police department to help them grow their nonprofit. We have community support funds in Boynton Beach. And then this recent year, we have another organization that became a nonprofit recently, Boynton Strong. And so they wanted to have Peace in the Hood because we spent $2 million to renovate our Sarah Sims Park. And we said, yes, you can have street ball, but if you start playing music, if you start selling food, you're ending up into an event, and we require police presence there because we don't want it to ever escalate. We want to have that presence there. And so I was able to help them get the funding necessary. And so, we as elected officials, we represent you, and so you need to let us know what you need represented at the city commission meetings. As you heard earlier, funding was a big issue with the police department. You've heard in our society about defunding police, but the reason why is because we only have so much money. We don't want to tax our population so they don't like us. So that's kind of where I see it is that we want to use the funding as wisely as we can. And so I'm glad that our police chiefs here are moving towards the community policing model, and so that we are trying to be proactive instead of reactive to these situations and giving our community the information needed to help resolve their issues without calling 911 ahead of time. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here, and I wanted just to say that this was really a great dialogue. I thank you to both of the chiefs up here. Learned a lot sitting in that chair. I'm hoping that everybody else did too, and there's a lot of takeaway here, so thank you both. And also for Mr. White, Ms. Barbara, I just want to make sure that I say thank you for actually doing this. It's so important to understand why we're here. This was an issue that came about, and it wasn't just George Floyd. This has been something that's been brewing for a very long period of time. I think George Floyd was the tipping point. And that's the reason why we're all here. We're all talking about something that we haven't talked about, and we needed to talk about. And so I thank George Floyd for allowing us to be able to discuss something that I think for a very long period of time, as a white woman, I've known that racism exists. I absolutely know it, and it's something that I don't know how to deal with it, but it's important for us to keep the dialogue going. One of the things that I started to do, and I think that Chief Sims alluded to it, is meeting with my community. And I'm not talking about my community that looks like me, my community that looks like you. To ask them, what is it that I can do? How can I make a difference in your life? What can I be doing in this role to be able to help change the whole dynamic that has been going on for way too long? And so I started meeting with activists first in my community, moved on to business leaders, and then also had groups of clergy. And we met over and over and over again, trying to find ways to be able to address racism that is so deeply seated that it's not just in the cities that we're feeling this, it's absolutely in every aspect of all of our lives, in every part of lives, whether it's schools or whether it's the justice system or whether it's police officer, even my, the community of those of us that are leading. We have to understand what role we can play in order to be able to change that and change that initiative. And so that was my promise to those that I'm meeting with. Unfortunately, I think we had probably about 10 meetings, and then, of course, everything shut down and we couldn't meet any longer because even the city closed the doors and we couldn't meet. But we will pick up where we left off, and we're going to be doing things here in Delray Beach to celebrate, to make sure that we're making people understand that we're embracing this, we're moving forward, and we're going to do what we can. Even things as simple as, and this is something that we were all talking about, getting loans. It's very difficult for people who are of color to go in and they could be in from a business that's very successful, and they're being judged by going into a place where they're trying to get a loan. And I thought to myself, it's so bizarre because when I walk in, I'm not necessarily going to give them my business. When they're walking in, from what I heard from the business communities, they're hoping that they can get a loan from that business, that one place they're walking into. So there are things that I think that cities can be doing. We have a lot of money. We could maybe put that money where basically they are not discriminating, where they are giving out loans to everybody very easily, not depending on just color of skin, and it's making it easier. So these are some of the things that I think that we have to start talking about and figure out what we can do as leaders to make it different for everybody and make it equitable, because that's really where it's not. So I thank you so much for allowing me to be here and for speaking to you, and hopefully this will be a dialogue that we continue and that we can actually make the change that's been necessary for generations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Petrolio.
Remember that if you were online and you sent in questions and we did not get to answer them, we will forward those questions to our two chiefs, and they will get back to you with answers. See how I commit your time?
Thank you.
And they will respond to you, so you will get responses. Hi, I'm sorry, Commissioner Weinroth.
That's quite all right.
I didn't call
Commissioner
your...
Bernard had to depart, so
Okay.
I have stepped in. Commissioner Bernard and I both share both Boynton Beach and Delray Beach. They're our constituencies. The whole county, of course, is our constituencies. Gentlemen, chiefs, I thank you so much for your time this evening. This was very, very educational. I think our constituents, our stakeholders, should be proud of the professionalism, both in your departments and in the other departments within our county, within our sheriff's office. And I think what our stakeholders are looking for is fairness. And I think that you've exemplified that in the policies you talked about tonight. And I think as we're working with the sheriff, as he's implementing the cameras, we're going to be able to have that transparency we're talking about. And I think that our stakeholders can be proud, again, of the professionalism that you're bringing to bear, and that we can be feeling safe that you're out there protecting us. So thank you so much for this tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
And we certainly like to thank you, the audience here, the people online watching this. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you have learned a thing or two or 10 or 20 through this community forum. And as Barbara Cheeves mentioned, this isn't the last one. This is ongoing within the community.
We will be this is a traveling show, so this will hit I heard 27 police departments. I'm scared now, but this will go throughout the county. So we will have, you can tell your friends that live in other places with other police chiefs that they will also have an opportunity to hear from their chiefs. And good night. Thank you.
And thanks again, Chief Javaro Sims and Chief Michael Gregory. Thank you.
Oh, man.